Hi, I'm Andrew Yang. This is Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast.
Welcome to Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. I'm Will Rucker, and today we've got a very special guest in our political season, which who would have thought we'd talk about politics here, right? So I'd like to welcome Andrew Yang. Hello.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So glad that you're here. I'm truly honored. And when I say I'm honored, I don't just say that because, I'm supposed to. I mean it.
Oh, wow. That's so kind. I'm thrilled to be here. One, to support your campaign. Will needs to get into the Nevada State Assembly where he can do the people's work. And two, just thrilled to be able to sit and discuss these issues with a leader who wants to help people and promote compassion, solutions. I know that that's one of the things that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so dive right in. And this is the hardest question, I promise, of the entire show. And it's simply, how do you define compassion?
Compassion is genuinely feeling someone else's pain or struggle and having that influence your behavior or attitude.
I like that. That brings in the empathetic piece as well as then the action piece, which I think is so important.
Yeah, I get frustrated when people restrain their empathy to inaction, shall we say, or faux action, which right now takes the form of social media. It's like, hey, if I liked or hearted or retweeted that, then I did my job. Meanwhile, someone's life is not going to be improved by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And social media has been, of course, anything that you're trying to promote, it's one of those necessary evils, so to speak, where you have to engage, but it's so polarizing.
Yeah, I say all the time that social media is pouring gasoline on various fires that are being started in our public discourse, where first you have political incentives that drive you towards corners and particular directions, which is one thing the Forward Party is trying to remedy. Then second, you have media organizations that enjoy separating us into camps. And then you have social media exacerbating the entire thing and separating us into 1,000 or 1,000,000 different camps. So it's going to be tough to bring us back together. It's one reason why candidates like you are so important, in my opinion, because it's very, very difficult for someone to spend 5 seconds with you and be like, oh, this guy, like this guy just wants the clout or like the authority. Anyone who spends any time with you is like, okay, like I may or may not agree with everything that Will's about, but I certainly sense he's positively intended and he's a person of faith.
Yeah. Let's talk about those intentions for a bit, because with the Forward Party, one of the things that you have constantly had to battle against is you're just really promoting yourself. You ran for president and then ran for mayor, and now you have a party. And so people are like, well, what's the real motive? And I don't just mean like conservatives, it's conservatives, liberals, everyone's kind of coming. How do you balance just navigating that and staying true with your true intention?
What's a really odd critique is that it's actually about 1,000 times easier to promote yourself as part of one of the two major parties. You know what I mean? There's like this giant apparatus built in and a lot of energy and press, and then you raise your hand and do that. Then people are like, okay, I get this. And we're seeing folks, including folks I know, who are getting distorted or shaping themselves because they're running in one party or another, and then they're saying all these things. I'm like, I don't think you really believe that. But that is where the energy is. Mm-hmm. So someone saying, hey, you're starting this new thing because like you want the shine. It's like you have these billion-dollar parties and apparatuses, bestowing that upon people. Like, we're trying to build an alternative because it's what the country needs. It's what people want. And we're trying to reconnect this bond between people and their representatives, which right now is fractured and attenuated for a bunch of reasons.
Yeah. So the way I view this party, and please tell me if you view it differently, is we're kind of the tip of the spear. And then we've got to just get everybody else to kind of come along, because what you're doing is really saying, let's collaborate. Let's do the things that make sense to the most of us, which of course scares progressives because they hear moderate and think status quo. And it scares the conservatives because they're like, we don't want change. So do you see the party as kind of that tip of the spear, or are we past that? Are we more forward than I would say?
No, I think your perception is spot on. Where we're this vanguard, and I ran for office on some pretty bold policies, and so I think there's this misconception that you necessarily that being moderate in tone or approach or collegial or conciliatory, maybe we all come together and we decide we want to do something really big. You know what I mean? Like just like the fact is right now, nothing big is going to get done in this current system because you don't get rewarded for doing anything big. And so if you reform, I'm still about the same things I was about when I was running for president, including Dr. King's vision against poverty. And I mean, he was also against racism and war, which I'd also love to, remedy. But poverty struck me as the easiest, frankly. Oh yeah, because poverty. I mean, there's a solution to poverty. Just put a certain amount of money in people's hands, and then you've pretty much done it. And I, looking at our society. So I ran for president on that idea, and I still think that we should be striving for big, bold solutions like that. But I've concluded that our current political system will never deliver anything like that. And so if you were to refashion our political system where it listened to most of us, then all sorts of things could be on the table. And I don't know if that falls into like this moderate centrist critique. I'm sympathetic. So here it is. It's like I was a Democrat for a long time. I ran on this anti-poverty platform, and I thought that people on the far left would be like, okay, like I'm totally into this because this is even like further than Bernie was willing to go. You know what I mean? But that was not the response because it was just something new and different. And what I came to realize over time was that unfortunately, we're having increasingly abstract ideological conversations that are independent of what it would mean to people in real life. Maybe because we don't even think these things are going to happen in real life. You know what I mean? Like I'll argue for, and by the way, something I campaigned on as well. It's like I think we should have universal healthcare in this country, but there are so many structural impediments to having something like universal healthcare that I would end up. I would pose the fact that again, we need to reform our political system if we're going to be able to deliver on certain things. So there are different reasons why people are going to come to this conciliatory space, this compassionate space, and we may have wildly divergent policy views. But we should come together and say, look, the status quo is going to deliver us what? Antagonism, hatred, ruin, dysfunction, regardless of where you are on this generally fabricated left-right ideological spectrum. Like you look at it and be like, look, like we're all going to lose in this world. So let's try and fix this. And then if we can have intelligent, principled discussions about what we really want to do, then I might not get everything I want, but I'm still going to be in a better place than I am now, especially if you're one of the vast majority of Americans who feels like you're on the outside looking in. What I say is like, it's not left versus right. It's not that this other set of Americans are your enemy. It's those of us on the outside looking in versus those who are kind of at the few levers of the machinery on the inside. And the outsiders at this point are the alienated or the marginalized or like the left behind. I mean, must outnumber the insiders at this point, what? 10-1? At least. So something very dramatic. And so when you raise your hand and you're like, yeah, I don't think the system's working so well for me, they'll be like, who's to blame? Those people over there who are not like you and they disagree with you on this or that. And you're like, I'm not sure that's, I don't know if that's my problem. It's one reason why I'm so pumped about opportunity here in Nevada to move away from party primaries, because the party primaries end up setting you up in this like, hey, it's like this tribal conflict, and there are these two tribes, and like you're going to be in one tribe or the other, and then we're going to like and then and the darkest thing is when you go to them and be like, hey, we'd like to change the system. It turns out the people in those tribes like it this way.
Yeah, let's dive into ranked choice in just a minute. But before we get there, healthcare. You mentioned you were for universal healthcare, universal basic income. I think that all of those are moderate ideas. I think that everyone having a college education in the year 2022 is a moderate idea. Why do you think that the political parties on both sides have failed to produce what the majority of people want?
Yeah, and the system's just been lagging behind for years and years and years. There's been a corruption of the American political system, and it's taken place over, I would say, about 40 years. Started in the 80s, in my opinion. There were intellectual underpinnings to it. There was this school of thought out of some of the business schools around how shareholder values are the only measurement for business success, and then that ended up permeating different pockets of American life, including the culture and the government. I used to joke about how universal basic income seemed far out when I was running for president on it, but it was a very mainstream idea during the 60s. And then today, it just seems far out because we've gotten so far out of whack, that the almighty dollar kind of got a hold of things and started dominating more and more of our society, starting around 1980 or so. I don't know why. So you know why 1980 is in my mind as like when all this stuff went down, is because there are I've looked at the curves of the American standard of living, and the difference between productivity and income. So up until around the late 1970s, those curves were like more or less lined up, where like American productivity and American standard of living were going up at the same rate. And then starting in around 1980, like productivity kept going up, and then standard of living started to plateau, where we weren't making any more money essentially since the 80s for like the average American. By the way, then we jacked up the costs of healthcare, education, and housing, and that's why Americans are so pissed off and distraught. The American dream, which my family came to this country for, is just that your kids are going to do better than you. And today, most of our kids aren't going to do better than us, and it's pissing everyone off. And you're looking up being like, well, like, what the hell happened? And then the political figures, again, will be like, nothing to see here. Like, you know who's to blame? Like, those guys. And you're like, wait a minute. Like, shouldn't this be an everyone problem? Whether you're a rural white family in a red state or, like a black family in a blue city.
Yeah. The parties are a challenge. And as a Democrat, I can say that from the inside and say that even though we are, I'm doing air quotes for those listening, one party, we're not one party. We don't all think the same. We're not a monolith. There are a variety of ideas and approaches within even the Democratic Party. But what I think unites us is value, what we believe in, not necessarily how we get there, but what we believe in, I think, is a unifying factor. For those that would say having multiple parties dilutes something like the Democratic Party because we are such a big tent and empowers radical conservatives, how would you address that issue?
I feel like the standard for the Democratic Party and for our political system generally would just be how are people, families, and communities doing. And so if you make the argument that, look, like the current mechanics are working great for people, families, and communities, then I would respectfully disagree and say, like, it seems like people, families, and communities are not prioritized in this political system. And that should be the entire goal of the political system. Like, the goal of the political system should not be any one party or another. The purpose of our politics is not our parties. The purpose of our politics is whether our kids are going to live better lives than we are. And so if, let's say hypothetically, we were all in a world where we were confident our kids were going to live better lives than we are, and the Democratic Party was like, hey, look, we did that, then I would look up and be like, yeah, okay, cool. Instead, we're not in that world. We're in a world where reasonable people are looking up very, very anxious and terrified about the future their kids are inheriting. Problems get worse, not better. And the Democratic Party it isn't really tied to the fortunes of the Democratic Party are not tied to ours. Like that's the fundamental disconnect that has to be remedied. And in my view, the best way to I vastly prefer a good person in office to someone who's less good. But we should know that we're past a point now where if I get a good person into a particular seat, that all will be well. There have been good people in various good seats, and the reality is degraded, and then people are getting more and more frustrated and pissed off, and so if someone says "Hey, Andrew," which obviously I have heard, is "Hey, Andrew, you were Team Dem and now you're not Team Dem, and I don't like that," then I'll be look, I'm doing what I think is best for American families and communities, and if you make it so that that someone like me has less to do, great. You know what I mean? If anyone, Democratic Party or whomever starts going around improving people's lives and solving problems, I'm all for it.
Yeah, what I hear in this is you have a long range view, and it's fueled by hope, not fear. And for me, one of the things I would seek to do with this podcast is really amplify hope and give people a reason to believe that things are possible again. And I think there are a lot of people who have lost hope and are so disenfranchised that they don't think better is possible, and so different is very scary. And so I want to talk about ranked choice voting because it's been such an issue, and we're at the tail end of the election, and quite a few folks have already voted. So, we're talking to the folks that are really either on the fence or just, had obstacles to keep them from voting. But one of the arguments against ranked choice voting is that it doesn't fundamentally change the issue, which many people see as the undue influence of finance in politics. What do you think about that?
I would agree that money in politics is a massive problem, and I wouldn't suggest ranked choice voting is going to fix it. I think that we should be trying to fix different problems in different ways. But I do think that ranked choice voting would open up the system so that, let's say that I was someone, actually I'll use myself. Let's say I was someone from another party who showed up and be "Hey guys, I want to give everyone money. That's my big idea." And you have ranked choice voting, then different people can say, well, you know what? I'm going to take a chance on that candidate or that party, and then rank, let's say, Democrat second, so that there isn't any harm done to the party that I've been traditionally supporting. That strikes me as a win. And that doesn't solve the fact that we have way too much money in politics, but you can imagine new entrants that are scrappier and don't have a whole lot of money actually getting some headway and traction in a system where people are allowed to vote however they like without fearing they're going to waste their vote. Because no one wants to waste their vote. It's if you think this candidate has zero chance, you're voting for that candidate doesn't seem very wise. But if I can vote for that candidate and then just rank the more traditional candidate I think is going to win second and just know that no harm was done, then that should be good for people and parties with less resources.
Yeah, I see it that way. I certainly do. And I'm one of those people that believes in voting my values. And what I have seen is sometimes it's a choice between voting your values and knowing you're going to lose, or kind of voting for the lesser of two horrible outcomes.
Well, yeah, these systems have set us up and pit us against each other in a way that's really false and unfair to us. Mm-hmm. It's what you're saying in a lot of situations is okay, look, there are folks you don't like, you don't want them to win, so we're going to give you this other option that you find more acceptable, and that's the entire ballgame. And then if you say, look, maybe I'd like to be able to vote my values and not increase the chances of people I don't want to winning, so let's just implement that system, ranked choice voting, people will be against it, not for any good principled reason, but just for the simplest, most straightforward reason, which is like they like things in a way that they can control. It's like if you look at the objections to ranked choice voting, they just seem so disingenuous. Like, I just wish someone would raise their hand and be like, hey, we don't like this because it would make things less controllable and predictable for us, like whoever us is, because that's the truth of it. Like, but what is the actual, like, what's like the stuff they present? Too confusing, like too obtrusive, not ready. I mean, like, this stuff is stupid, really. I mean, like, I'm a parent. I've got a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. They can rank their preferences 1, 2, and 3. If I go into like a McDonald's and be like, "Hey guys, like, what do you want?" like they can sort through candidates that might have different letters next to their name. Like that. This is so saying that that's too much of a hurdle for voters is really just it's not honest. And also as a numbers guy too. I mean, ranked choice voting has been used in New York, where I live. And 88% of New Yorkers found it simple to use. And so one of my jokes is like 88% of New Yorkers, like 100% anywhere else. Oh, no. Or, it's like, I mean, I think it was around the same percentage of Alaskans. So like saying this stuff's complicated is like, it's really weird because it's like, wait a minute. Like 9 out of 10 folks in these other places found it easy to use. And even the 1 out of 10 that didn't find it easy to use, like, figured it out. You know what I mean? It's not like they just like got discombobulated and like ran out and didn't like fill out a freaking candidate. I mean, you can fill out one candidate and just rank someone first and that's all you do and it's fine.
My mom is here and she loves to tell people about me as a child. And when I was a child, for my Christmas list, I actually did the ranked choice thing. I was like, this is what I really want. But if you don't get me this, then I want these 2 things.
That's good.
And if you don't get me these, then I want all of this.
You're ahead of your time.
Yeah, so
also made your mom's life easier.
Well, I ended up usually getting everything. So I think that was the easier part.
Wow, some good mothering.
But with that, I want to talk about consciousness because I think that's really the idea of change is one that is hard for people to embrace. It's the saying that everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change. And so is our consciousness as a society ready to do things differently? And here's kind of what I mean. We're comfortable with the 2-party system. We've experienced that. We've had that. We're comfortable with capitalism. And we think that that's, even though most people define it completely incorrectly, and most people are not capitalists, but that's a whole nother podcast. Even though that's the case, they're comfortable with it. They're familiar with it. Are we evolved enough in our consciousness to evolve?
Yeah, in many ways, that's the threshold question, isn't it? And for people who become anxious and insecure and fearful, and then if you present change, they're like, oh, like it's going to be worse. Like, I get it, because we have been eroding your confidence in our ability to evolve positively, probably, for years and years. And so then if someone shows up and it's like, hey, it's evolution time, they'd be like, oh, like, I don't believe we can do it. And you're like, oh, it's like, yeah, you might have a point. But in my view, we don't have choice but to try to bring people in that direction, because things will not stay the same even if you'd like them to. Like, things are going to get worse or better. And in many cases, things are getting worse, not better. And so then your only choice then is to be like, okay, let's make things better. And then you have to get enough people to have their heads up and have a mindset of compassion and hope and abundance and optimism and possibility. I mean, I think my value add in many ways is that I can see things that are possible and then let other people know it's like, hey, we actually can do these things. We can do better. And I've lived versions of it myself. I mean, I was like the child of immigrants. My parents came here and like I was just told, get good grades and get a good job and the rest of it. And then I started a company and it failed. And then I got up and tried again and then ended up doing a whole set of really unlikely things in like a relatively compressed period of time. I mean, heck, I ran for president of the United States as a nobody. raised $40 million, made 7 presidential debates, outcompeted, a dozen political brand names, mainstreamed an idea that most people thought was far out initially, but now a majority of Americans are for. And now when you look at our two-party system, like we need the same kind of evolutionary energy and mindset being like, look, guys, like you can do a holding action on the way to ruin, which is, by the way, where we are right now. Or we can actually try to do things differently and better, adopt processes that will make us more accountable and representative, elect folks like you who don't want to just bang the party drum and will work with anyone who wants to do good, and your values driven. You'll try and be universal and not parochial, I think, I've run for office a couple of times. I've supported dozens, hundreds of people who've run. And most of the people that I've supported have been really well-intended, exceptional humans. And many of them have not won their races. And so you see that there's this, you imagine that there's this correlation. It's this good person is doing the right things, they should win. And then that's not the way it shakes out, in a lot of these instances. And so you start also, frankly, some really not so great people sometimes win. I've seen that too. And you still have hope that there's this mindset of optimism that can help win the day and make it so that more positive outcomes happen. Because I think that that's the struggle the country is undergoing right now, is that you have pessimism versus optimism, or anxiety and fear versus generosity and compassion. And I would say right now the negative forces have an edge or are winning for a whole host of reasons. And that's scary. But the fear, if anything, it should embolden us, because you're at a point now where you're going to experience change in some way, and you can experience positive change very, very quickly, just as you can experience negative change quickly.
Yeah. What's the one big lesson you took away from your presidential run?
That I married well. Still married. No, so this is going to sound, this is maybe a little bit specific, but I've learned of the importance that the media has in certain contexts, like a presidential primary, where most voters are taking their cues from certain media orgs, and these media orgs sometimes don't play it straight. You know what I mean? I mean, that's one of the things that, I went in with a higher degree of faith than I came out.
I can totally see that. I've watched some of your interviews online, and I'm like, are you serious right now? Are you really asking him that question right now? And it's frustrating for me because I've been asking questions a long time. I've been asking them really my whole life, and I ask with curiosity. But what I see in the media, and which amplifies some of this extremist conspiracy theory driven energy, is that it is disingenuous. But the media really is trying to pigeonhole you into a position that's not yours. I did a radio interview this week, and the host asked me, what's the one thing you're going to do when you get in office? And I'm like, that's a great question. I'm one voice out of 42, and it has to go through the Senate and to the governor. So I can't promise you anything, but that doesn't make for good radio. And so I can bring my character, I can bring the way that I think about problems, but I can't promise you that if you elect me, I'm going to get better schools. I'm going to try, but I'm one of 42, and there are systems in place that are actively against changing the way things are. So I guess I say all that to say, I prefer podcasts because you can talk a little longer.
Yeah. It's so the media definitely ends up trying to drive ratings and energy in a particular way. Cable news is maybe the worst medium. Podcasts are much better. Radio is somewhere in between. But it's one reason why I value what you're doing here with your Compassion in Las Vegas podcast, is because you recognized very quickly that you need to have like a way that you can get your message out in a way that's genuine, and have conversations with people in a human way that actually lets people get a sense for themselves.
Yeah. All right. So I want to switch directions for a bit as we wrap up our time together. I want to know what you're listening to. What music is keeping you going these days?
It's weird. As I've become a bit more of a fuddy-duddy, I've found myself listening more to 80s music, because like there was a long period when I was like moderately current, and then I was not current anymore, and so then I just have like recalibrated and been like, oh, let me just listen to the stuff I grew up with.
Hey, nothing wrong with 80s music.
Yeah, there is nothing wrong with 80s music. I'll fight anyone who says there is something wrong with 80s music. So I was about to say it's the best decade of music. I don't know if that's true. Is it? Wait. Best decade of music. Okay, I'd put the 80s above the 90s and the 2000s. So yeah, I guess it's 80s.
So 80s, you had Tina Turner, you had Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Prince.
Maybe the greatest of all time.
The list just goes on and on. So 80s is a hard decade to beat.
It's like one of like, so when I was running for president, I got to meet some rock stars that I idolized as a kid, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this, and then and they like knew who I was because I was running for president and all that stuff, and I was like, so
not a bad perk, right?
So I had it was like it was one of some of the only times I fanboyed out. But I was talking to someone who was friends with Prince before he passed. It was like, oh, Prince would have really loved you. And then I thought to myself, it's like, I might have met Prince. maybe so like, I love Prince. He was a genius. I saw him in concert any number of times, but like, I would never imagine myself meeting him as like, in a social context. So anyway, I was a missed, rest in peace, Prince.
Yeah, I would have liked to meet him too. I did get to see him live as well. So that's
nice. Where did you see him?
Detroit, Michigan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at one of the big stadiums that we have there. No, I take it back, at a theater, Fox Theater in Detroit.
Yeah, he played very small venues and big venues. It's wild. I saw him in some very, very small clubs, and it was. He would just go and like mess around.
Mm-hmm. He was a real musician. Like
he was a real freaking musician.
The craft was it for him. So, all right. What about books? What book would you recommend that folks read?
Right now, I tend to read a lot of books about democracy. So I this is going to be self-promotional, but I did write a book about my presidential campaign and what I learned and figured out and why I think we need to have a different approach to party politics called Forward. Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. And for people who are concerned about democracy, like I'm concerned too, I might be concerned for slightly different reasons than others are, but we're really in a very, very precarious time. So in addition to that suggestion, another book that I read recently I was very excited about. There's a book, this is going to be very, very wonky, but I read a book called The Politics Industry that really affected me, and it talks about how the incentives in our system drive decision makers a certain way.
Yeah, just one quick deviation on that. Yeah, incentives, when you change the incentives, the behavior changes. I don't know why that seems to be a hard concept for people to get, but like if you change that, things change. So anyway, back to you.
Yeah. No, that's it's like people. It drives me nuts when people are like, just go on TV or whatever and be like, hey, let's be moderate, let's get along. When all the incentives are to be a nutcase, you know what I mean? Like if I'm a nutcase, I get energy, I get money, I get votes, I get all this stuff. Particularly, frankly, on one side, it's like on that side. And so those incentives are just compounding and getting stronger. And so if you want things to get better, then change the freaking incentives. Like where you changed the incentives in Alaska, and look what happened. Sarah Palin loses in a race that she would have won in a conventional process. Lisa Murkowski, only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump, who's up for re-election. Republicans in Alaska, her approval rating went down to 6%. And yet she somehow got through the primaries. You know why? because anyone could vote in that primary. If it was just a Republican primary, there's no way she's coming back. Oh, by the way, if there was a Republican primary, she probably would not have voted to impeach Trump because of incentives. You know, you look around at these other political figures. If you expect someone to do something that's professionally career-ending, like, you're going to be waiting for a long time. You know, so like what you should do is be like, let's make it so that you actually get rewarded for doing the right things. Expecting someone to do the right things when they're getting rewarded for doing the wrong things is just unintelligent.
Yeah. And you picked up on something I hadn't connected, which is if she hadn't had the ranked choice system, then having to face that primary in a traditional way would have discouraged her from doing the right thing.
So I heard that half a dozen Republican senators have gone up to Lisa Murkowski and said, I envy you so much that you don't have to deal with the primary. Now, can they say that out loud? Of course not, because the Republicans in their party would be like, "Oh, you don't like us." But there are a bunch of Republican senators that are like, "Oh my gosh, if I could just be free of that primary, I might, like, I too might have voted to impeach Trump or whatnot." Because like, a critical mass of those Republican senators freaking, like, can't stand Trump, but then they'll just like fall in line, which is the path to ruin in this country. You have people who are going to be rewarded. And so one of the most stark examples, and this is something people here might not know about. So Mike Lee in Utah, who's running against Evan McMullin. Mike Lee was an anti-Trumper who voted for Evan McMullin in 2016 as a protest against Trump, being like, Trump is not my guy. And then fast forward, now he's like Trump endorsed, texting with Mark Meadows on January 6th, being like, it's like, now I'm Trump's guy. So he just like flipped completely from being a never Trumper to a Trump acolyte and a stooge. And so now he's running against Evan McMullin, the guy he voted for in the presidential election in 2016. And Evan McMullin's like, dude, you voted for me. and now you're like, a Trumper. And you know why? Because Mike Lee figured out that's where his bread is buttered. That's like, look, like the Republicans in Utah will be down for Trump. So I guess I'll be down for Trump too. It's saddening to see many political figures kind of just go where their base is going. But I know people who are running in that party who are saying things. It's like there's no way they believe that, but that they are competing, and on some level, you have to say, well, it's like, look, if I want these people to seem more reasonable, I have to change the system they're in.
Yeah. If we look at our ballot question here, yes on 3, there are several organizations that have just left that off of their cards. Vote for all of these candidates, vote for this, vote yes on 1, vote yes on 2, and then as if 3 doesn't exist, which I respect that they didn't just say no, but I also am like, but you actually support this. And so why wouldn't you tell your base?
It's because of fear. Because it's like, oh man, do I really want to go against like the party establishment and get someone mad at me? I mean, like, it's one of the things too. When I left the Democratic Party, like, I was shocked at how much, people would close ranks. Like, people that I considered myself to be very, very cool with. I'm still cool with some of them, but like some of them, you could tell are just like, and so there's a lot of fear. And I think that that's really bad for all of us, that if folks can't express their support for this ballot initiative because they're like afraid of like pissing someone off. I'll rewind to something, during the pandemic, I went on CNN and was talking about how, like, they should pass a relief bill at a time when 80% of Americans wanted a relief bill, like in late 2020. It turns out that like you were not allowed to criticize the Democrats' inaction on that bill. And Nancy Pelosi at that time was holding it hostage, and only she knows why. The anchor was like, "Hey, what do you think?" And I just said it honestly. I was like, honestly, like, they should just freaking pass this bill. I mean, like, what the holdup is. And there was this need to correct me that I was just like, I thought it was mind blowing. Where anyone who wants to look this up, they can. Nancy Pelosi went on that show the next week to sort of to like correct me.
Wow.
And so you're just like people can't express their opinion. Like what the heck's going on? Like like that was wild. And by the way, her like correcting me was not a confidence inspiring performance, and ended up you can also look that up. It was,
all right. So if you had a magic wand and you could do anything in the world, and it's not passing ranked choice voting, aside from that, what would that thing be?
I mean, it would be massive poverty relief. I mean, we end up winning ourselves as a parent too. Like you invest in kids, like you'll get returns back many times over. The child tax credit showed that. You look at health, productivity, mental health, education, all outcomes, like all of it. Like we'll get it all back. If you're a company, and I've run organizations, and you invest in people, like you win. It's just in our political system that's seen as a pure cost and a waste, and it's really dark. It's very dehumanizing. It's like any good company invests in its people. Any good country or society that wants to like flourish invests in its people. Here. And this too, this is one of my beefs with the Democratic Party. It's like the Democratic Party does not want to invest in people. It wants to invest in systems. It wants to invest in bureaucracies. As a parent, parents might be able to relate to this. Like 2/3 of our kids' outcome is determined outside of the school. It's like what's happening in the home, words read to the kid, levels of stress in the household, nutrition, like any of a bunch of things. And so when you say to folks, like, I want to help kids learn, the best thing we could do is just put resources into the household, and the kid would have a much better chance to learn. But but for whatever reason, like that's not the way we think in our systems today. And that's what my big problem is with our current political approach, is that what happens to people and families isn't the measuring stick. I mean, the child tax credit that was passed nationally, and people who are watching this remember this, like that, where you were getting $300 a kid for a number of months in 2021, and you remember those checks. And by the way, 174 economists looked at it and said, this is the best thing the American government has done for its people in a generation, and we should keep doing it. So what happened? Of course, they got rid of it at the beginning of this year in 2022. And one of the things that stunned me was that there was no outcry. It's like millions of families just had a lifeline cut in a way that they felt immediately. Like protests in the street, no. Like anyone outside of members of Congress offices, no. Press treatment, almost completely absent. Like just the people and families did not matter. So if you ask me what I would do if I had a magic wand, it's just to like put resources into people's hands and lift people out of poverty.
I think that's something that's hopefully going to get you a magic wand when you leave here.
I'm still working on it. And my belief, people come up to me sometimes, they're like, hey, Yang, where's my $1,000? And I say, still working on it. But like the ways to get there are through reforming our political system, voting yes on 3, making it so that people and our leaders are actually connected, and then our leaders might actually deliver for us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been beyond a pleasure. I mean, I could keep you here for several more hours, but I think our audience is probably like, okay, great. So I do appreciate you. I appreciate you being a visionary and having the courage to fight for change. That's big.
Well, we have to get people feeling positive enough to think that change is a good thing. And one way to get them there is to have someone like you in the state assembly, because, people around you would be like, oh, this guy actually cares about me and mine and wants to do right by us.
Thank you. This has been Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. I'm Will Rucker, and as I always remind you, you are not just a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop, and what you do matters. So live compassionately.